We explore religion and culture, or the anthropology of religion. The systems of beliefs and practices that we call religion has been the result of the attempt to answer questions about our origins, our purpose, the meaning of life, and the afterlife. Anthropologists identify religion as a cultural universal, meaning that it can be found in all cultures. However, as we'll see, not all cultures have a word for religion, nor do they make the distinction between religious and non-religious behavior. A way of thinking that has grown more and more popular in recent years has been the idea of people who will say, I'm spiritual but not religious. And this reflects the idea of people who will not subscribe to particular religious beliefs, but yet do hold some type of spiritual beliefs, practices, and do other things, or will choose from the various religious practices of the religions of the world. So, exactly what is religion? There are a lot of definitions that you will find, but for the purposes of this course, I'd like to define it as an organized set of beliefs and practices designed to account for the non ordinary world, the metaphysical world, and supernatural life forces. As I mentioned earlier, anthropologists identify religion as a cultural universal, meaning it can be found in cultures around the world. There are three elements that we do identify being present in all societies. The first being the belief in the soul or souls. Many people who are familiar with Western culture and primarily the influence of Judeo Christian religions know that there's a belief primarily in one's soul. But there are other cultures around the world who believe in many souls. As a matter of fact, in some African religions, for example, there's a belief in as many as seven souls. Religions have some types of rituals that they practice to either control or appease supernatural forces. And we will talk about rituals a bit later, but they can be anything from prayers, incantations, dances, other things that are designed to appease or either control supernatural forces. And we know that also there is a belief in life after death. And how that manifests and how that plays out varies among the religions. However, we know also that not all societies separate religion from everyday life. For many, it is integrated into things that people do regularly, and they don't make the distinction between their lives and religion. That tends to be a Western way of thinking. Not all societies have written records. There are many that are oral cultures that have their oral tradition. In fact, there is a word that we have to describe that is called orature, that refers to the oral tradition that is passed down generation to generation by people that are trained to oftentimes recite the history and the philosophy and the other tenets of various cultures. And finally, not all cultures distinguish between the natural and the supernatural in the same way. So let's talk about some common elements of religion. First, there is a belief in transcendent powers or deities, and there are a number of ways that this is identified from the perspective of the anthropology of religion. The first is through a term that we call animism, and that is the belief that nature is enlivened by personalized spirit beings that can be separate from their bodies. The second is animatism, which is a belief that nature itself is enlivened by impersonal or supernatural spirit power. The third is polytheism, which is the belief in many deities. And then there is monotheism, which is the belief in one deity. We talk about religious myths. And this is very, very important. It's very important to make this distinction within the context of the anthropology of religion. We think oftentimes of a myth as being something that is not true. But in the context of the anthropology of religion, a myth refers to the sacred stories of a religion about supernatural beings and powers and their roles in creating the universe and living things. Some examples of this might include creation or origin myths that you might be familiar with, how things came to be, how people were created, how the world came to be, how the universe came to be. There are flood stories that are common among many, many different cultures. There are trickster myths where you have characters that play tricks on human beings or play tricks on the other gods who have a very complex role in the whole scheme of society. There are hero myths where there are individuals who are born very often in very complex circumstances who eventually rise up to become a hero. This was something that was popularized by Joseph Campbell. And some more contemporary examples would be Star Wars, Harry Potter, and The Wizard of Oz. I want to now talk about rituals. Rituals are a combination of gestures, symbols, and language. Now, the gestures and symbols carry their own meaning. And in addition to that is language, which actually is a collection of symbols because the words that we speak, the sounds are actually symbols that when combined together make up words which make up language. But though all of this helps to clarify and to define the actions of a ritual. So let's talk about some ritual activities that are based on belief and talk about a particular kind of ritual, and that is the rite of passage. And rites of passage imprint the change of the person's social status on the minds of the participant, and they also grant community approval of the legitimacy for change. Some rites of passage are very familiar. They include rites marking a person's progression through life, such as birth rituals. We know baptism in Catholicism. In Judaism, there's the bris. We know that there also are rites of passage rituals, for example, that recognize childhood to adulthood. These will be confirmations and quinceañeras. There are bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs. There are other important life cycles such as marriage and death. And then also anthropologists identify three phases in the typical rite of passage. The first being the separation stage, where an individual is removed from his or her former status. There is the transition or initiation stage where there are activities that take place that help to instruct a person about their new position, their change in status. And then finally, there is incorporation. And that is where individuals are then able to re-enter society with a new status. And these are the stages of rites of passage. Religion is rich and powerful with symbols. It is one of the things that is very, very essential to religion itself, and that is the use of symbols. And we remember again that symbols are objects which represent or have an agreed upon meaning, and they can be classified as either direct or indirect. Also, in religion, we recognize those persons that we refer to as religious specialists. And these are people who are everything from shamans to healers to diviners to mediums to priests and priestesses to prophets and more. And these are the people that very often have either leadership roles or they are the ones who are responsible for carrying out rituals and doing the things that are a part of the ritual activities of a community. There are also religious organizations and institutions we can think of in terms of uh, churches, denominations. We could think about mosques and synagogues and other organizations that are a part of the institutionalized and organized function of religion. Just about all religions also have a community of believers, and how they gather and when they gather may vary, but that is an important part of most religious systems. Those are the community of believers, or community, the religious community. We move on to talk about some things including magic. Magic is defined as the application of belief that the supernatural power can be forced to act if certain rituals are performed. Again, these would be spells, incantations, sacrifices, many other types of rituals that are used to either control or influence the supernatural. If we continue to talk about magic, there are some other considerations that I wanted to raise. And that is, when we first think about magic, there are two forms of magic we recognize. The first is imitative magic, or the idea of like produces like. That if we do something to an object or we perform a particular action, that there will be a corresponding action within the supernatural realm or within the realm. And the second, which is related in many ways, is contagious magic. And that is the idea that things that once had contact with something continue to influence each other. And these are the two types of magic when we start talking about magic from the perspective of the anthropology of religion: imitative magic and contagious magic. I want to briefly talk about, and I want to say that these are some very traditional concepts of witchcraft and sorcery, but we first look at witchcraft, and that in societies that there are distinctions between witchcraft and sorcery. In the case of witchcraft, the idea that it is the use of innate or psychic power to induce harm. And then with the idea of sorcery, sorcery is the use of magic, rituals, and materials to inflict harm on people in socially unapproved ways. Now, this gets a little bit more complex than we might think, because there are also beneficial aspects to witchcraft and sorcery in terms of leveling society, in terms of redressing wrongs, in terms of bringing about a sense actually of community togetherness. Oftentimes there may be a witchcraft accusation that can be very divisive, but as things are done to try and bring about a sense of redress and recourse, actually can bring communities closer together. It's a complex issue. I want to also acknowledge, though, that in addition to the traditional idea of witchcraft, there is also Wicca, which is a part of the neo pagan tradition, and it is more recent than a lot of the more traditional understandings of witchcraft. It is a polytheistic religion that emphasizes gender equality for the god and goddesses in most cases. That it is also expresses the idea that nature is a manifestation of the deity. It's a nature-based religion that has a ritual calendar, and it is one where some of the symbols that are quite commonly found are candles, ritual knives, wand, cauldrons, cups, brooms, pentacles, those kinds of things. It is something that has been popular, remains popular among a lot of people. So let's talk about the social functions of religion. One of the things that we look at religion or see religion as being one in which there is social control, where there are prohibitions and restrictions and taboos that discourage inappropriate behavior within people and in communities. There's also conflict resolution that very oftentimes religious principles can help to reduce stress and frustrations. There's also the idea that religion can reinforce group solidarity because it helps people to identify what it means to be a part of community, who is a part of community, and oftentimes that is found on the basis of religion. In addition to the social functions of religion, there are the psychological functions of religion. First being the cognitive function of religion, and that is that religion provides an intellectual framework for explaining parts of the world that we do not understand. So there are ways in which religion can provide explanations. When we talked about that, it seeks to answer questions such as the origins of life, the origins of the universe, and what is our purpose, our meaning. Very often, religion will serve to provide those types of answers, and we look at that as being the cognitive function of religion. And then there is the emotional function of religion, is that which many people are familiar with, that it helps to reduce anxiety by prescribing straightforward ways of coping with stress. We know that very often in many different cases when there is a crisis, when there are life events such as death or tragedies or other things that happen, very often people will turn to their religious resources or to their religious leaders, or there will be a religious explanation that's offered. And then we come to the idea of religious fundamentalism, which is something that has gained a lot of attention in recent years. And just a few points about religious fundamentalism: that first, that it arose as an anti-modernist movement, which is the idea that the modern is somehow a corruption of society, and that what is earlier, purer, and better way of life is what the appeal of religious fundamentalism is. It's based on a strong feeling among its adherents of alienation from the surrounding modern culture. And fundamentalists assert an identity that's separate from the largest religious group from which they arose. We very often will find that there will be a particular sect or religious tradition, and then there are individuals who feel like it has lost its way, that it is no longer holding to the basic tenets and ideas, and so then there will be a rise in fundamentalism from there. And the followers or fundamentalist adherents see a sharp divide between themselves and other religions, and between a sacred view of life and the secular world, and what they also would see as nominal religion. And then finally, I started out talking about the idea of people who will say, I'm spiritual but not religious. But what is spirituality? And spirituality is defined as concerns about the sacred and non-ordinary world on the level of the individual. And this ends the presentation on religion and culture, or the anthropology of religion.